Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Jennifer Caniglio with CCBJ. We're thrilled to be working with our partner H5 to present today's webcast, Jumpstarting AI, Understanding Uses and Breaking Barriers. Our distinguished speakers are Doug Austin, editor of eDiscovery Today, Zain Dhanani, Director of Analytics for GoHealth, Bobby Malhotra, eDiscovery Counselor for Munger, Tolles & Olson, and Jeff Grobart, Associate Director of Professional Services for H5. We encourage you to ask questions as well as fill out the survey with your feedback at the end. All can be found as icons at the bottom of your screen. If you're interested in the presentation, you may also download it using the resource icon at the bottom of your screen. Today's webcast is CLE eligible. Please be sure to answer all pop-up check-ins and enter your state bar number in the survey. All states will be applied for after the webcast, and certificates will be distributed once the state approves. CLE credit is only available for the live day and not on demand. And now with that, I'll pass it off to Doug, who will lead us in this discussion. Doug?
Thanks, Jen. So we have, I will advance to the agenda here. We do have three terrific topics to cover today related to Jumpstarting AI, and a terrific panel to discuss these topics, representing perspectives from an in-house law firm and service provider point of view. First, we'll discuss several use cases for AI in legal besides technology-assisted review. And you'll be surprised how many there are in the areas of legal services and legal operations they cover. Next, we'll discuss some of the methods and mechanisms for how AI and analytics are actually conducted to support these use cases. And finally, we'll discuss some of the considerations and the ethics related to the use of AI by lawyers, including a look at ABA Resolution 112, and we'll address the elephant in the room, which is whether you, as legal professionals, need to worry about your job with the advent of AI. As Jen mentioned, we'll also look to hopefully cover some questions from the audience. We'll try to save some time at the end, but we'll try to address questions along the way as well as we're discussing the topics. So feel free to submit your questions to the panel, and we'll do our best to address them. As I mentioned, we do have a terrific panel today. We do, however, have one late scratch. Dennis Garcia had a last-minute conflict and couldn't be here today. But we still do have three terrific panelists who have a lot to say about all things AI for legal. As for introductions, I'll go first. I'm Doug Austin, editor of eDiscovery Today, which is a daily blog about eDiscovery, cybersecurity and data privacy trends, best practices, and case law. I've been writing a daily blog for over 10 years, and I've been providing legal technology and eDiscovery consulting services for over 30 years. And I stopped counting it for a bit. So I'll let each of the panelists introduce themselves. Bobby, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hello, everybody, and thanks for that very helpful background, Doug. My name is Bobby Malhotra, and I'm eDiscovery Counsel with Munger, Tolles & Olson in Los Angeles. I've been with the firm for coming up on 13 years now, so time flies. My practice primarily focuses on advising our clients and firm attorneys on eDiscovery preparedness, planning, and execution, as well as information privacy and data security issues. I do also serve as eDiscovery counsel outside of the litigation context, preparing best practices and workbooks and plans related to eDiscovery for some of our largest technology clients as well. Thank you for allowing me to present the introduction, Doug.
Thank you, Bobby. Zain, you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. I'm Zain Dhanani, been working in the analytical space for quite some time now, currently with a company called GoHealth. Previous to that, I've been with a bunch of different companies, including Groupon, the Milwaukee Bucks, and including working with one of the other panelists here, Jeff Grobart at FTI Consulting. A lot of experience in the discovery space when it comes to document review, and then on top of that, video recordings and different things like that. Excited to share some of my experiences and maybe provide a different perspective with kind of like the analytical background. But appreciate everybody coming out and listening to this webinar.
Thanks, Zain. And Jeff, want to introduce yourself?
Certainly. I've been working in the legal space for the past 20 years or so, and in the e-discovery space in particular for the last 15 years. The last 2 of that has been with H5. And during that time, began as an e-discovery analyst and worked my way through, various roles and responsibilities, mostly, overseeing projects and engagements, but also pursued and earned a master's degree in data science during that time and learned a lot about the applications and uses of AI in, not just this industry, but across many others, and really looking forward to being able to share some of the insights from that experience, as well as the experience that I gained working with legal data live and in person.
Great, thanks, Jeff. And I should also mention that there are slides in the back with more details about each of us and links to our profiles. So if you want to know more about us, you can check those out there. Of course, before we start, it always bears mentioning that any ideas expressed by us here today are our own, not those of our organizations or our clients. So if you don't like what you hear, blame us, not them. So with that, here are some high-level use cases for AI in legal with applications for information governance, including supporting retention policies and identifying data that can be defensively deleted. So why is this important? I'll throw an interesting stat at you. Our accumulated digital universe of data has grown from a tenth of a zettabyte in 2005 to when the EDRM model was created, to around 47 zettabytes today, which is about 470 times as much data as we had back in 2005. So how big is it? It's 1 trillion gigabytes. By 2025, that volume will nearly quadruple again to about 163 zettabytes, or 163 trillion gigabytes. So it's continuing to be more challenging than ever to manage data effectively within an organization. So with that in mind, Bobby, what are you seeing from your clients in addressing their InfoGov needs? And what are some of the drivers and challenges you've heard from them?
Yeah, that's a great question, Doug. Our clients are certainly exploring AI and how it can help with some of their most complex information governance challenges. You pointed to defensible deletion, and I think that's just one use case that they're exploring. But really, before we get to the being able to defensively delete, there are some prerequisites, right? That's just the byproduct, I think, of first being able to properly and accurately identify and categorize your data. And that's really where AI fits in. I think AI models are usually more accurate with the identification and categorization of data than traditional types of approaches that organizations may be used to, such as keyword or metadata analysis, or even manual human assignments of retention labels. And it's more accurate because AI is not just relying on the text of the underlying documents or metadata or manual human processes, but rather AI analyzes the underlying document attributes of your data, and the algorithm kind of understands the relationships and patterns contained in your data. So simply put, our clients are realizing that these tools are much more powerful than the traditional tools that they've been using. Companies are spending millions of dollars every year trying to classify and protect these sensitive documents. In litigation, we're spending a lot of time as lawyers negotiating very meticulous protective orders in terms of who can see data, how they can see data, the form in which they can see it in, what to do after the fact. There's a concern out there. Obviously, you don't want to let your crown jewels slip through. And if you are producing trade secret type documents, you want to make sure that you're classifying them appropriately and you're not overproducing. And AI can really help mitigate some of those costs and risks associated with managing data. And it's a much more proactive way usually to do it, because you're doing it outside of the litigation context in the ordinary kind of course of business. In terms of drivers, I think AI has really come to the forefront due to kind of a mix of three, perfect mix of three drivers. One is the explosion in data volumes with unstructured data, right? Undeniably, every organization is seeing this. You just talked about kind of the data volumes and then provided some interesting statistics. So that's kind of the first element. The second, I think, is the new or enhanced regulatory and data privacy landscape and requirements. And when you layer on top of that now, the litigation risk and exposure associated with keeping potentially even harmful documents longer than necessary, you have three factors that are really the perfect storm of drivers pushing AI to the forefront, I think, in organizations and at law firms. And I think you also addressed, challenges. The challenges here are very similar to the challenges we saw over the years in the legal technology world. In my view, it's often the lawyers themselves. We tend to be creatures of habit. We're not always the most cutting edge. To get a lawyer to believe and trust that AI works and is better than these traditional tools, that is probably the single most largest kind of challenge that I'm kind of coming across. It is a bit of a paradigm shift if you think of it kind of from the traditional lawyer's point of view, but I think we're getting there slowly.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you that it's difficult to get lawyers to adopt new technology. Certainly legal professionals in general are very much creatures of habit. So certainly, and you raised data privacy, and we'll certainly touch on that here in a moment. So Jeff, from a service provider perspective, what are you seeing from your clients in this area?
I think it really echoes a lot of what Bobby said, but to get into it in some detail, it starts really from a retention policy development and enforcement perspective, that developing a good written policy first, and then creation of a methodology of enforcement of those retention policies so that you know what you're keeping and why you're keeping it, whether it's for regulatory purposes or for business purposes. In the defensible deletion world, it comes down to the acronym of ROT, what's repeated, what's obsolete, and what's tangential, what don't you need at all. And, once you can keep what doesn't fit into that ROT world, then you can start talking about your defensible deletion strategy. And, beyond kind of that corporate policy and what you should keep a hold of, we then, obviously as a service provider in the discovery space, we're most concerned about things that involve litigation hold. And so from an application standpoint, email tends to be an easy and simple application. Most IT departments have a easily deployed methodology for being able to keep someone's email box, from being deleted, or any of the contents from being deleted, if only in a vault environment or something along those lines. It's when you start getting outside of that space and start talking about what exists on somebody's laptop, or what exists on a server space, even in a cloud environment or a collaborative environment where some of those policies are somewhat easier to automate. Again, much as what Bobby was saying, having some kind of an automated crawl that can walk over the data and ensure that you know what's there, you know what's being held on to, you know who's touching what and how they're interacting with it, it allows a certainty that the hold is taking effect in the way that you expect. For as much as I think the folks that deal with lit hold and data processing might kind of take a step back when we talk about Google Drive data and the complications that go along with it. At the same time, at least you have some certainty about lit hold within the Google environment, whereas really everywhere else you don't have as much certainty. And so having AI solutions to help back up some of those uncertainties really can help you avoid what inevitably becomes the error that I think a lot of corporate entities make, which is hold on to everything because you never know what you might need in the future. And that's almost, again, getting back to Bobby's point, it's the worst mistake you can make because it opens up all sorts of rabbit holes about keeping something that's so damaging or so problematic for you as an organization or you as an individual that you didn't even need to have. And so, again, development of policies and technologies that support those policies really having that handshake together is the best method to leverage AI in this space, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. And certainly one of the challenges I think here probably as well is that there continue to be new sources of data, like you talked about Google Drive and so forth, that an organization has to get on top of. So you've got to be continually updating those policies and those procedures and mechanisms to support the additional data sources you're running across. So
that's
certainly
exactly
that's absolutely true. So one area that's emerging significantly in importance in recent years is data privacy, as Bobby mentioned. In May 2018, as I think many of you know, Europe implemented the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, to protect data privacy rights of European individuals. And at the beginning of this year, California implemented the California Consumer Privacy Act, or CCPA, to do the same for California residents. And those are just two examples. They're the two examples we talk about the most, but many other states, many other companies and parts of the world have also strengthened data privacy laws as well. And the fines for failing to protect the data of individuals can be huge. So personally identifiable information, PII, personal health information, PHI, there's certainly two categories of information that need to be protected today. That's added a considerable data management burden to many organizations, including, of course, healthcare companies. And obviously, we have, fortunately, someone here from a healthcare organization, Zane, to talk about this. So, Zane, how do you use AI to help protect the sensitive health info of your individual customers?
Yeah, and just kind of tying this together with what was said previously, I think one thing that needs to happen in this space in general is making sure that your company has a policy, and I just want to echo that is extremely important. Once you have a policy in place, then you can develop solutions that address that policy, and that's kind of what we've done. So in the space that I work in, we record consumer information that needs to be pushed out to partners. We are kind of a middleman in the healthcare space. And with that, that information is something that is obviously private to an individual, and but is still required to be shared with insurance partners that we work with. So when you're taking in this type of information, you have to understand that there are things that, you have somebody that's talking to an individual consumer on the phone and taking down things like their zip code, their personal name, their social security address, different things that would make them identifiable if that information were to get out. And so knowing that our business inherently has that kind of a risk, we obviously needed to put policies in place to address that. And part of that policy is, how do we make sure that this information doesn't get out to anyone outside of our organization, and is even limited within our organization. And then when it does get to the carrier partner that we have, which is required for our business, how can we make sure that it is only accessible by that partner and not by any other partner that we have? And so addressing that, some of the things that we've identified that we're able to do is being able to encrypt information that our kind of like salespeople on the phones are entering in, and having a tool that recognizes that, hey, this is something that is actually a kind of like a PII or PHI data point. For instance, if someone is entering in, a zip code or a social security number or what have you, kind of on the fly, encrypting that information such that no one could actually write that information down on their system. Additionally, making sure that that system is only logged into our servers that are within our company bounds, so that we house that information and know what that interaction was on our own platforms, and isn't something that can be accessed on someone's personal computer in any way. So when that information is being stored, how then do you safely make sure that that information gets to the partner that you're working with? It's a very good question. I think a lot of organizations are addressing this in different ways. We've decided to take a more technical approach to how we work with that. And a lot of our systems work on an event stream. So when we know that we have a certain amount of information that we need to pump out to a partner that we have, our systems then recognize that we need to emit that information to that partner. And we use API keys that are specific to our partners to encrypt that information and make sure that through that channel where we're pushing that information out, that API key is then individual. It is like an individual API key that only that partner has. And then additionally, whenever we are receiving confirmation that they received it, it is also then being emitted back to us via an API key that only we have that says, hey, we received this information and this is what that information entails. That way we can have a two-way stream of making sure that we are giving them the proper information, but that information is not necessarily accessible to anybody else. And then we get that response back from them. And so when we're housing it internally, there's proper controls in place to where only people with a specific security clearance are able to access the information that exists for that purpose. And those are only the people that work on the part of the process where we need to emit that information to our partners. That way, the rest of the organization doesn't have access to somebody's personal social security number or zip code or their name or anything else like that. So that's kind of how we deal with it in the healthcare space. It's definitely something that's evolving, similar to what you said earlier. States are starting to have their own specific guidelines on how you deal with this stuff, and I think that's going to also evolve in the future as more and more states adopt different policies.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Zane. As one of our audience members noted, there are differences when it comes to managing data in support of criminal investigations versus regulatory compliance. And so certainly one of the things we're seeing is the need for compliance monitoring in other areas, such as the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, or FCPA, or potential antitrust violations or financial crime. So Bobby, how are you seeing AI technology and workflows being applied to these compliance areas?
Yeah, another great question. I think AI is really starting to gain some traction in the compliance world, but in my opinion, at least, I think it's still underutilized. I think we're slowly seeing the rise of AI in the compliance world, but not fast enough, in my opinion, because I think it could be tremendously helpful. AI can really help organizations more efficiently deal with, a lot of their compliance requirements. For example, what you just stated. We're seeing organizations build AI models for investigations in the context of conducting investigations related to misconduct, antitrust, employment investigations. And they're really ideal tools to help target and identify documents and data touching on key compliance issues such as harassment, misconduct, price fixing, collusion, or fraud. We're seeing some of our financial institution clients using it to identify and detect in the ordinary course of business documents protected by anti-money laundering non-disclosure laws, right? So it's really being used as a tool in that area for financial institutions. I think in general, AI itself provides the compliance investigator with a powerful set of tools that allow you, in my experience, to complete an investigation more quickly and efficiently. Because as you said, it is just more efficient in analyzing multiple data sources and complex data sources and getting to the key information faster.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Certainly I think the compliance monitoring investigation areas are going to continue to grow in terms of AI use cases. So we don't want to leave litigation out. Certainly, we said we're not going to talk about TAR, but there are other litigation use cases for AI that many legal professionals aren't utilizing. So Jeff, besides TAR, what are some other use cases you've seen for AI to support litigation and discovery?
Sure. In my organization, we leverage a multitude of different means to use AI. for everything from PII identification to privilege identification to assisting in advancing identification of things like trade secrets or confidentiality or what have you. A lot of that comes from a linguistic-based identification process through classifiers that our team will build through, whether it's a more generic classification engine. We have a product that will do privilege identification where we've got a robust set of we refer to it as privilege, general privilege or general legal terms or general legal topics that will identify that when built in conjunction with things like known outside counsel and in-house counsel and also who are you working with as far as contractors and consultants and things like that, it can help, without too much heavy lifting, help you identify your potential privilege universe almost by default. At the same time, we can also work with various corporations to build a custom classifier that's very specific to their needs, especially if they've got a particular privilege profile, or if they are serial litigants that need something that is a little bit more specific to their litigation profile than what our out-of-the-box classifiers might be able to provide. And so, that's one way. Other things that I think are a little bit more common that, virtually everybody's using at this point in time are things like, more basic analytics like thread identification, duplicate identification, document clustering. That's an unsupervised learning methodology to be able to gather conceptually similar documents together to be able to simplify review, things like that all kind of work together to be able to make a litigation review or litigation analysis something that does not require as much effort as a painstaking linear review or full-fledged analysis. And then when you throw in other things that have taken hold in the space, such as statistically significant sampling and other things that are now so commonplace that it's amazing that 10 years ago it was so novel that it really has changed how most of us are doing handling document review in a litigation space. And then beyond that, we're also talking about being able to, at least within the H5 world, we do a lot of things that, again, leverage linguistics as the base of our process, but then also layering on linguistics with machine learning, which, is I think what a lot of folks go to as default when they think about AI as a kind of hand-in-hand enmeshed gears means to be able to get to a better than a sum equaling better than the combined being better than the sum of the parts output, which really winds up being the best available solution for our clients, whether it be a tar-based solution that isn't simply a software solution or a privilege solution that's not just leveraging, whether it be our linguistic models or keyword search or just leveraging some kind of a machine learning model.
Yeah, I certainly agree that we're starting to see a lot more of putting the things together, the machine learning and the linguistic models working together to even do much more with the capabilities. So that's a great segue into methods and mechanisms.
Doug,
go ahead.
Doug,
Bobby.
Do you mind if I just add a footnote to what Jeff is saying?
By all means.
All right. So one thing I just wanted to highlight, as a lawyer, this is particularly important to me, how useful AI has been in the area of privilege identification. I think it's something that is probably a very robust topic and subject to a separate webinar or multiple webinars. But human review, as we all know, is prone to errors, and it could get very messy in terms of making inconsistent privilege calls on identical documents. And in my experience, AI models are just more accurate, consistent, and usually they tend to be cheaper and faster. And projects tend to go much more smoothly with AI. You don't have to worry about the machine getting tired after 8 hours of review. You don't have to worry about the machine making inconsistent calls. For those of us who've been involved in a traditional priv log review, you know that the process is expensive, tedious, fraught with problems and risks. And really using an AI solution helps, I think, mitigate a lot of those challenges and often leads to a more consistent and accurate result at a lower cost for the client. So I just wanted to highlight that point. I know that's beyond the, going into that in detail, beyond the subject matter scope here, but I think it is an important point to highlight.
No, absolutely. That is a great point, Bobby. And I'll just throw out contract review, contract management. I know that was kind of in the description as another beyond topic, but when you think about, the typical cost for document review per document is about $1 a document, and for contract review, it's probably $200 to $500 because they can take hours to review a single contract. So the ability to dive into the clauses and the paragraphs and the sentences for contract review solutions is certainly big and important. So certainly we could spend all day just talking about the use cases, but we'll move on to the mechanisms and methods a little bit as well. So as you can see here, we've got 3 methods listed here that we'll kind of start the conversation with. Rule-based systems, otherwise also known as expert systems, are a fairly simple form of AI, and where the systems mimic the reasoning of human experts in solving a knowledge-intensive problem. So, Zane, as an insurance marketplace provider, you're working with, as you've already talked about, working with a lot of highly personal information for your clients and prospects. So how do you use rule-based systems to ensure their data is secure as you work with the different providers?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a couple of different things here. So I think I also wanted to address sort of how, I think we talked a little bit about compliance and how we deal with that as well in this space. So some of that we're actually experimenting these days with is speech analytics. A lot of our interactions with consumers are on the phones, right? And so when we're having these interactions with people on the phones, especially in the space that we're working in, where we're talking about healthcare related things, we absolutely need to make sure that people are aware of the different risks and disclaimers that are present to them at the time of them making decisions for healthcare. So when that comes up, a lot of what we're doing here these days is that we've had traditionally companies have a QA department where they listen to different calls and they listen to conversations that people are having with consumers. These days, technology is advancing so much, especially in AI, that we can start to recognize speech patterns of how people are communicating with others. And so with that, very similarly to what we were talking about earlier, I think humans can understand something and try to interpret it in a certain way, but what a tool like speech analytics can do is actually interpret it the same way every single time and give you that consistent messaging. And so that's kind of a space that we're kind of dealing with right now, and it's just scratching the surface here. So if you think about it, a QA department can probably only review 5 to 10% of calls that are coming in, or review 5 to 10% of, let's just say it was documents or something else that we're working with. What a machine like a speech analytics tool, or a tool like Jeff or everybody else was talking about before this can do is actually review everything. And when you're talking about reviewing everything, think about the amount of risk that you're allowing, that you're taking away from your business and your company by allowing everything to be reviewed in a very programmatic way that is the same way every single time. You don't have to worry about the things that, we were talking about earlier, where someone's tired or, they interpreted something differently today. Maybe they were a little sick and they didn't think about, how this would impact things, or their mindset was a little bit different that day. Tools like speech analytics can mitigate that risk by identifying if someone said a specific phrase. You could tell a system to say, hey, did someone say this exact phrase that we absolutely have to say whenever people are enrolling in insurance. And so that's something that we're kind of on the forefront of right now and trying to work with. And this is also something that goes hand in hand with, like, how do you feel comfortable with a system or tool to evaluate things like this? Well, you have to have kind of like a hand-in-hand like process where humans can actually interact with the AI tool in itself as well, right? So when we're talking about a QA department that's reviewing 5 to 10% of calls, and we're talking about a tool that's reviewing everything, you can cross-reference and make sure that what we're seeing with the humans is similar to what we're seeing with the tool. And also you can have systems that are actually, that have user input as well. So if I'm looking for specific phrases, I can type in what those phrases are and say, hey, please flag instances where we see this happening. Thus that you feel like you have a little bit more control over the process of what it's actually looking for, and it's not just always kind of learning on its own.
Yeah, and that's a great example. I mean, these people are literally the voice of the company and dealing with your customers here. So the ability to use that speech analytics to get them standard how they respond to things and reduce the risk. Certainly, I can see that as an important way for you guys to manage risk within your organization. So another method, of course, everybody's familiar with, Jeff alluded to it a little bit already, is analytics. And in this case, by analytics, I'm referring specifically to unsupervised machine learning mechanisms and approaches for managing information to support legal tasks. So, Bobby, how have you used analytics tools, or how have your clients used them to assist with their day-to-day legal workflows?
Yeah, thanks, Doug. So clients are using these analytic tools, as you mentioned, unsupervised machine learning tools to help with a broad spectrum of use cases. It's kind of just the applications are infinite. These tools are great because there's no, as you mentioned, they're unsupervised machine learning, so there's no human element involved. In a supervised machine learning model where you're using AI, you have to go through the training and kind of configuration and calibration of a model. These kind of work out of the box. They analyze and provide insights into data without actually getting kind of background information from humans. So it kind of takes the human component off, and because of that, they're relatively easy to kind of implement. And they're great at helping, in my experience, uncover anomalistic behavior, unusual patterns in your data. So to give you an example, we have clients using it to highlight and flag documents related to potential upticks of communications being sent around certain topics prior to an earnings release call, right? Or in the case where theft of IP is a very serious concern, where we have clients in those industries, or we've had recent software developers kind of move, and there's an extra kind of compliance focus on theft of IP issues in the usual course. These tools can be used to flag emails being sent, to, for example, personal email addresses, maybe at atypical hours, right? Another powerful feature that clients are using is sentiment analysis, and I find that to be a very powerful tool. So it can really help you isolate those emotionally charged type communications, which are really powerful if you think about it from a compliance perspective. So I think these tools generally have helped our clients gain really meaningful insight around their data quickly and efficiently, and they're real, kind of powerful tool that is part of your kind of tool belt as an investigator or as a litigator.
Yeah, I've worked with some investigators, and it's really interesting and fascinating how they use sentiment analysis. The emotion is a pretty good indicator to identify things like potential harassment or, in some instances, potential corporate malfeasance activities. So it's really interesting how they have their workflows to go through and use tools like that. So definitely a great point there, Bobby. Actually going to ask Jeff a little bit about kind of your experience with self-learning models, and kind of what are some of the things you've seen in working with your clients specifically on the models.
So from a self-learning model perspective, or kind of advanced modeling perspective, the reality is that models can take a multitude of directions and can be applied in really any creative application that you could think of. And so it's about use cases. It's about developing war stories and case stories. So currently, I think the most common is something that we alluded to earlier, which is in the compliance sector, and probably most commonly in the finance world, where doing things like monitoring of transactions, for instance, for money laundering and other kinds of transactional improprieties or outlier events, that by having a human initially train the machine and iteratively provide feedback to be able to kind of improve its understanding of what is and isn't inbounds versus out of bounds by way of transaction types or behaviors of institutions or individuals. Over time, the model can better understand what should or shouldn't be flagged for further review by a compliance officer or the legal department or what have you. And eventually, get to a point where it can really narrowly and accurately identify those items and minimize the number of false positives that get advanced for human evaluation. It kind of reinforces a bit of what Zane was talking about. Evaluate everything, but then identify only what needs to be reviewed further by people. But in the bigger scheme, it's about what's coming next, I think, is what's really exciting for me, at least, in the constantly evolving world of data science and model construction and where the computer science is going. Everything from deep neural networks to, for me, reinforcement learning seems to be the thing that gets me most excited. And for those that are unfamiliar with it, the general principle there is where you use two models to effectively teach themselves how to identify patterns and information. So the experiment that gained a lot of traction and made some waves in the community was, you had one model that was built to create and generate images, falsified images, and insert them into a set of real pictures. And on the other side, you had a model that was designed to identify fraudulent images. And through, kind of iterative back and forths between the two models, both were improved to the point where the identification model became so good at identifying fake images that it was, not perfect, but better than anything else that could be trained by a human being. And on the other side, you had a model that could create deep fake pictures that was so good that it could fool any human being. And while you wouldn't need those models to kind of work cooperatively on their own, you could then turn those models to operate independently for whatever other purpose. And so when you take that idea and apply it to legal concepts for, again, wherever your imagination may take you, whether it's for privilege identification, compliance monitoring, or PII identification, what have you, there's literally an infinite number of applications where something like that reinforcement learning can effectively be used to replace a lot of the human effort, where you use an attorney or group of attorneys to kick off the process, but then you let the the models essentially do their thing and then turn them loose into the world to be able to, do what they're designed to do in a way that is useful for my clients, your clients, what have you, and in an ethical and meaningful way, so that we're not having people spend a lot of time, because one of the chief complaints we get is it takes a long time to train a TAR model. It takes a long time to be able to refine whatever other models that we're working with. And so if we can take some of that effort away from the attorneys or other folks that we're working with and let the machines carry some of that water, why wouldn't we? And that's just one example. And, there's literally hundreds, if not more, researchers investing and time and effort in development of other modeling techniques and other modeling applications that can all benefit, any number of different industries, including the legal industry. And I think that that's really exciting as the next steps for us all.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jeff, I think you're the segue king here, because you talked a little bit about how these processes can replace human tasks. So let's talk competencies, ethics, and let's talk the elephant in the room. I'll ask each of you the question. Zane, I'll start with you. Should lawyers and legal professionals be worried about whether AI will take their jobs?
I don't think so. I would think of this as more of like a complementary or supplementary tool, right? So it allows you to focus on the areas that you need to focus on, while allowing some of the additional, kind of more like busy work to be done by things that are more built to do automated work. It's the same thing we think about in many different industries where people are kind of worried about the same concept. It's just things that are repetitive, things that have patterns, or things that technology does really well with. Things that are a little bit more ambiguous are areas where you have someone with specific expertise. And so to me, in this specific space, it's just an area where you get something that can do some of the output for you, and then you can work on the other interpretation of documents or whatever that needs to happen. And work on that piece while everything is also being taken care of in the background.
Yeah. So, Bobby, what are your thoughts? Do you think lawyers and legal professionals need to worry about their jobs?
I don't. I don't think lawyers should be worried. I think any AI solution is only as good as the underlying workflow and the people who are implementing that workflow. So I don't think they should necessarily worry, but I think there is a little bit of a paradigm shift. AI solutions do require a different skill set and a different mentality. So the hours are still there, the time is still there, there's still value to it, just a kind of a different type of analysis and different type of lawyer. A lawyer, for example, that uses data-driven decision-making, right? That's the process of making your underlying legal decisions based on the actual data, based on reports, based on metrics, and using that data to help guide you, right? It also requires lawyers that are really going to sit there and roll up their sleeves and can analyze data, can extract patterns, or work with those folks around them that can help them understand the data. So it is going to require a little bit of a different skill set, but I think if you are nimble and you adapt to, kind of and embrace the technology, I don't think lawyers per se need to be worried. And I know there's a common misconception out there, but with the data volumes expanding and, the proliferation use of AI, I do think that there's more opportunities, not less, just different types of opportunities and a different type of lawyer for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And a kind of question from the audience that ties right into it. What skills do you need in-house to implement some of these AI mechanisms? Do you need a data scientist? Do you need somebody, like a Jeff who's got, that really level of expertise to implement some of these mechanisms? Any thoughts, Bobby, or any of the rest of you?
I think it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. I don't think you need a data scientist per se. I think a lot of these out-of-the-box solutions have come a long way in terms of kind of building the foundation for the AI to work. I think it is usually advisable to have an expert, though, who can kind of shepherd the process and provide guidance and counsel as needed. I find myself, for example, often managing the AI and automation workflow processes at my firm, right? I think you really need someone on the team with, or multiple people on the team with expertise in workflow, technology, QC validation steps. And depending on the project or goal of your project, you might need someone who has subject matter expertise in the underlying area, right? So if you're dealing with privilege identification, you might need a lawyer who understands the nuances and the gray areas of privilege. If you're dealing with a project that deals with data privacy, you might want one of the data privacy experts to kind of help and be part of that team, that AI automation team. So I think it really depends on the goal and summary, what you're trying to accomplish, but you don't per se need, in my opinion at least, a data scientist on every project.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, unless you're trying to innovate or create a new solution, most of the things that you would want to or need to implement are either commercially available or able to be achieved with outside consultants that can get you set up and be able to support what you need with adequate in-house participation. And so in most instances, there's not a need to bring somebody like me on board unless you're trying to do startup type work.
All right, no, that's fair enough. So, Jeff, what are your thoughts about how AI impacts the legal profession and job security?
I mean, I think it's a clean sweep. I don't think that there's any need for attorneys to worry about job security. The reality is that I don't think many lawyers got into the business to do document review or the other mundane things that AI and analytics are displacing as they're being implemented and adopted. And instead it provides attorneys opportunities to A, focus on the things that probably brought them to the law in the first place, and B, as AI and analytics are adopted, it in all likelihood is going to expand different and new areas in the law for attorneys to be able to provide opinions and oversight and direction to both internally and externally for their clients, direction and their opinions, so that they can ensure that everything is legally and ethically sound from a legal perspective. And AI in practice is something that is not perfect, and it is subject to potential abuse. And so if and when people abuse it, there's legal concerns there. And obviously that's where the legal profession can step in and be able to provide services as well.
Well, Jeff, you're uncanny with these segues, I got to say. But I certainly, since I'm kind of like to throw out stats here, when it comes to legal jobs and so forth. I think it's the consultancy firm McKinsey estimated that 22% of a lawyer's job and 35% of a paralegal's job can be automated. And obviously then what that gives you is the ability to focus on more important and strategic work. So certainly it seems like there are plenty of opportunities to leverage AI technology really to support that effort with no risk to jobs. Certainly from what Jeff brings up with regards to ethical concerns, many of you may be wondering if there are any ethical guidelines regarding for the legal profession regarding the use of AI. And there is one guideline that was published in August of last year is ABA Resolution 112, which addresses considerations such as bias and transparency, ethical and beneficial use of AI, and controls and oversight of AI and AI vendors. So, Bobby, what does our audience need to know about what Resolution 112 expects regarding lawyers' approach to AI?
Sure. Just some background. Last year, as you mentioned, the ABA voted to approve a resolution urging courts and lawyers to address emerging ethical and legal issues of AI in the practice of law. The resolution that the AB adopted is pretty light. It's brief, it's short on details. But really the purpose behind the resolution is simply to raise awareness amongst the bar of issues around AI, in my opinion, particularly as it relates to potentially flawed or biased input or results. My thoughts regarding Resolution 112 is that regardless of the nature of your practice, all attorneys really need to be mindful of their ethical obligations when considering when or whether to utilize AI. Resolution 112 really puts the responsibility on the attorneys to understand the AI and to ensure that AI meets their duties in terms of the legal and ethical requirements, including the duty of competency and the duty to supervise. So that's kind of the background. Like I said, it was light in terms of content, and it's more just to kind of raise the issues and make lawyers in the bar aware.
Sure. Yeah, the resolution is certainly light. There is, I think, an accompanying report that does provide some other thoughts and guidelines. And certainly one of the things that I find interesting is how bias can influence AI. Some of you may remember that I think it was in 2016 that Microsoft released a chatbot called Tay, which was kind of an experiment in conversational understanding, and it was designed to engage people through casual, playful conversation that was supposed to resemble how a teen might speak. But it only took about a day for various Twitter users and internet trolls to tweet Tay with various misogynistic and racist remarks, and Tay started repeating those back, and it turned into a disaster, and Microsoft, I think, was forced to shut it down within a day or two. So certainly one of the things that is probably notable here is how bias can impact AI models. Do any of you have thoughts about that and what legal professionals should do to address that issue or concern?
I think it just goes back to the kind of the duties of ethical duties of a lawyer, right? To kind of understand how the inputs are and the model, the black box is working. Not necessarily kind of inside the model in a cookbook recipe, but just kind of high level understanding. And if you spot these issues, kind of think about them and how to remedy the issues. So I think it kind of turns the burden kind of on the lawyer to kind of understand what's happening more in the process. It's not just a black box, and that's not going to be your excuse as a lawyer.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I'll pose to close out here. It looks like we got about 2 or 3 minutes to go. Kind of a final question for each of you. Adoption. How do we get legal professionals and the actual stakeholders who make the decisions to accept and adopt AI for legal technology uses? Bobby, you want to go first?
Sure. I often take, in terms of how do I get stakeholders on board, and the stakeholders can be, depending on the use case and what the goals are, stakeholders at my firm, combination of firm and client folks. It's kind of stakeholders of the overall project. But I often take a 3-pronged approach, usually, to get stakeholders on board. First, I work on modeling and cost projection, right? So if you have 2 separate budgets, one for a traditional workflow, another one with an AI workflow, and the cost savings are significant and substantial, as they often are when you're using AI, that really resonates, right? It gets the stakeholders to start thinking about now it impacts the kind of the bottom line. Second, I like to highlight the defensibility of the approach. I think it's important to note that computers are not running the show alone without human input, intervention, and oversight. That's kind of a misconception out there, and I like kind of highlighting that point to folks who may not be as well versed in AI solutions and AI workflows. And finally, I like to highlight the flexibility that comes with an AI approach. And what I mean by that is you can select the right workflow and the right level of automation to fit the needs of your particular project, depending on the risk appetite and the goals of the project, right? So it doesn't have to be, if you're talking about AI in the informational governance context, that you have to, basically categorize your entire data store as a company through AI solutions. You can kind of pick and choose You can have your proper QC and validation mechanisms to layer on top of that. So there are kind of safeguards to put in place, and I like to, kind of take that three-pronged approach when I deal with stakeholders.
That makes sense. We are essentially at time. Jeff or Zane, any last quick comments regarding adoption that you'd like to
quick stab at it. The other thing, just to add to what Bobby said, I think the only other thing is that you can decide how much or how little you want to use a tool like AI, right? So you can take it out from an approach of hey, I just want to have like a sample of this and see how it works. And let it prove out its use case for you, right? Like everybody has different feelings about, anything that goes on in life, including tools that might help them with their job. Keep an open mind and let the tool dictate whether or not it provides value to you. And if it does, then go into it and let it take on more of what you need it to take on. And if it doesn't, then no one's pressuring you into doing something that you don't want to do. So.
Agreed. Yeah, I was going to say much the same. Small steps are important. Gain confidence in what you interact with, and as you gain confidence, expand your footprint. And don't be afraid of testing new waters, but don't feel like it's an all or nothing proposition. Find something that fits a use case that you're being presented with, and test it, see how it works, and gain comfort that way instead of trying to dive into the deep end, because that's when you'll get yourself in trouble.
Yeah, no, those are all great points. And I'll just kind of end with my own thought on that, which is the more you can make AI-related workflows similar to workflows that legal professionals are comfortable with, to where they don't have too much adjustment to make. I think the more likely they are to be open to those workflows. So that's certainly one of the things I'm seeing is AI providers trying to take those workflows into account and make it a little bit more seamless for legal professionals. So with that, we are a couple of minutes past time. We certainly appreciate everybody's attendance today. Hope you found this useful and informative. And I want to thank the panelists, Bobby, Zane, and Jeff, for your great comments. And with that, we will sign off, and we will hopefully catch you next time. Thanks everybody, and thanks to you guys for your comments today.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Doug.
Thanks, Doug.